At the will, reading my billionaire grandfather left everyone millions of dollars. The vacation homes went to my stepmother, the logistics empire went to my brother, and me, his favorite granddaughter, I got an envelope containing exactly $110. My brother Darius laughed so hard he choked on his scotch. My sister-in-law Courtney looked at me with that pitying smile I had grown to hate. Poor Naya, she whispered loud enough for the lawyers to hear, but they were not looking close enough. They saw a wrinkled bill and a final insult. I saw a key. Because on that $10 bill in ink only, I knew how to find was a code that would unlock the biggest secret in New York banking history. When I walked into the vault the next day, the bank manager did not laugh at me. He bowed. Before I tell you how I used $110 to repossess my brother's life and bring an entire dynasty to its knees, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the underdog who finally bit back. My name is Nia, and at 32 years old I am a professional archivist. I spend my days preserving history, but my own family has spent decades trying to erase me. It started raining the morning of Grandpa Otis's funeral. Appropriate, I thought. The sky was crying because no one in that fleet of black limousines actually was. I arrived at the estate gates in a yellow taxi. The driver, a kind Haitian man named John, looked at the iron gates nervously. "Miss, are you sure this is the place?" he asked. I smiled weakly and handed him a $20 tip. "Yes, unfortunately, this is it." I stepped out onto the wet pavement clutching my umbrella. As the taxi pulled away, I walked toward the security checkpoint. A burly guard I did not recognize stepped in front of me, hand on his earpiece. "Name," he barked. "Nia." I said, my voice trembling slightly from the cold. "Nia Otis." The guard frowned, scanning his clipboard. "I don't see a Miss Otis on the guest list. There is a staff entrance around the back for catering." My stomach tightened. This was the house where I spent every summer of my childhood. Grandpa Otis taught me to ride a bike on this driveway. And now I was being told to use the service entrance. Suddenly I heard the click-clack of high heels on the pavement. A voice, sugary sweet and dripping with venom, cut through the rain. "Officer, it is okay. Let her in. She is technically family." I looked up to see Courtney, my brother's wife, standing under the awning. She was wearing a custom black Dior dress that probably cost more than my entire year's rent. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe, perfect bun. She looked me up and down, her blue eyes lingering on my hair. I wore my hair natural that day, a halo of curls that Grandpa always loved. Courtney, however, pursed her lips. "Oh, Nia." She sighed as if my appearance was a personal burden to her. "I see you decided to go with the natural look today. Brave choice for a high-profile funeral. And that dress. Is that the one you wore to your graduation 5 years ago?" I smoothed down my simple black dress. "It is respectful, Courtney. I came to say goodbye to Grandpa, not walk a fashion runway." Courtney laughed, a tinkling sound that lacked any warmth. "Of course, sweetie. But we have senators and investors coming today. Appearances matter. Just try to stay in the back, okay? We don't want people thinking the Otis family has fallen on hard times." She turned on her heel and walked back inside, leaving me standing in the drizzle. I took a deep breath, centered myself, and followed her. The main hall of the estate was transformed. Massive floral arrangements covered every surface. The scent of lilies was suffocating. I spotted my father's second wife, Evelyn, holding court near the fireplace. She was crying into a lace handkerchief, accepting condolences from men in expensive suits. I knew for a fact she had spent the last week researching vacation homes in Martha's Vineyard, waiting for this exact moment. I walked past her, invisible as always, and headed toward the front row of seats set up in the grand ballroom. That was where Grandpa wanted me. He told me just last week, "Nia, you sit right by me when I go." But as I reached for the chair with my name tag on it, a hand grabbed my wrist. It was Darius. My older brother looked like a caricature of grief in his Italian suit, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses even though we were indoors. He didn't look sad. He looked impatient. "You can't sit here, Nia," he hissed, his grip tightening. "Darius, my name is on the chair," I whispered, trying to pull away without causing a scene. "Not anymore," he replied, ripping the tag off the velvet cushion and crumbling it in his fist. "We need this row for the board members, Mr. Sterling, and the partners from the logistics firm are coming. They need to see a united front of leadership. I am your sister Darius, and I am the CEO Nia. This is business. Go sit in the back with the housekeepers. They are more your speed anyway." He shoved me gently but firmly toward the rear of the room. I stumbled back, catching myself before I fell. Around us, people were starting to take their seats. I saw looks of confusion, but no one said anything. In the Otis family, money was the loudest voice in the room, and I had none. So I walked to the back. I sat in the last row next to Martha, the head housekeeper, who had dusted these floors for 30 years. Martha squeezed my hand, her eyes full of tears. "He was a good man, Miss Nia," she whispered. "He loved you best." "I know, Martha," I said, staring at the back of Darius's head. "I know." The service was a blur of speeches from people who didn't really know Otis. They talked about his business acumen, his empire, his ruthless negotiation skills. No one mentioned how he loved jazz records or how he could identify a fake antique from across the room. I sat in silence, letting their lies wash over me. When it was finally over and the guests began to filter out toward the buffet, I stood up to leave. I just wanted to go home to my small apartment and mourn in peace. But as I reached the door, a tall man in a gray suit stepped in my path. It was Mr. Vance's grandpa's personal attorney. He was the only person in this room besides Martha who looked genuinely sad. "Miss Nia, please wait," he said, his voice grave. I stopped. "Hello, Mr. Vance. If this is about the seating, I am leaving." "It is not about the seating," he said loud enough for Darius and Courtney to hear as they walked by. "It is about the will." Darius stopped laughing. He draped his arm around Courtney and smirked at the lawyer. "Can't we just email the details, Vance? We have a celebration of life to host." "I am afraid not." Darius, Mr. Vance said, his eyes hard. "Your grandfather's instructions were explicit. The reading of the last will and testament will take place tomorrow morning at 9 sharp. Everyone must be present." He turned his gaze back to me. "Especially you, Miss Nia." Darius let out a loud, barking laugh. "Her. Why? Did the old man leave her his collection of dusty stamps? Or maybe that old truck he used to drive?" Courtney giggled, leaning into him. "Maybe he left her enough to buy a hair straightener. See you tomorrow, Nia. Try not to be late." They walked away, confident and cruel, already spending the millions they thought were theirs. I watched them go, clutching my purse. I didn't say a word. I didn't tell them that Grandpa didn't collect stamps. He collected secrets. And tomorrow I was going to find out which one he left for me. The walk from the main house to the guest cottage felt like the longest mile I had ever traveled. The sky had turned a bruised purple, heavy with the promise of a Chicago storm, mirroring the turmoil in my chest. I burst into my small living room, the sanctuary I had carefully curated over the last 3 years. Every item here told a story. The vintage rug I found at an estate sale, the wall of books organized by century, the smell of vanilla and old paper. It was humble, but it was mine. Or at least it had been until 10 minutes ago. I pulled my battered suitcase from the closet and began throwing clothes into it indiscriminately. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely zip the compartments. I did not have time to wrap my breakables. I did not have time to say goodbye to the garden I had planted out back. I was reaching for a stack of first edition journals when the door swung open without a knock. Courtney breezed in, leaving the door wide open to the damp wind. She held a glass of champagne in one hand and her phone in the other, already recording a video for her social media. "So this is the before tour," she said to her phone screen, panning the camera around my living room. "It is a little cramped right now and smells like a library basement, but just wait until we rip out these dusty carpets. It is going to be a puppy paradise." She lowered the phone and looked at me, her nose crinkling in distaste. You know, Nia, you really should have packed earlier. The contractors charge by the hour and Darius is not paying for them to wait around while you fold your sweaters. I ignored her, moving to the mantelpiece where my most precious possession sat. It was a photograph of me and Grandpa Otis from 20 years ago. We were on his fishing boat, the wind whipping our hair, both of us laughing at a fish that had gotten away. It was captured in a simple wooden frame he had carved himself. I reached for it, my fingers inches away from the wood, when Courtney stepped forward. Oops, she said, her hip bumping into the small table. The frame tipped over the edge. It seemed to fall in slow motion, tumbling through the air before shattering against the hardwood floor. The sound of breaking glass was sharp and final. Oh well, Courtney said, not even looking down. Clumsy me. But honestly, Nia, that frame was rotting anyway. You should thank me. I did you a favor. I fell to my knees, ignoring the shards of glass that dug into my skin as I scrambled to retrieve the photo. The glass had scratched across Grandpa's face, leaving a jagged white line over his smile. I clutched the photo to my chest, tears finally stinging my eyes. Get out, I whispered. Courtney laughed, taking a sip of her drink. Excuse me. This is my property. You are the trespasser now. You have 5 minutes before the security team comes to escort you off the premises. Don't forget your trash. She kicked a pile of my books toward the door and turned on her heel, leaving me alone in the wreckage. 10 minutes later, I was dragging my life behind me down the long gravel driveway. The storm had broken, and icy rain pelted my face, mixing with the tears I refused to wipe away. The wheels of my suitcase caught on every loose stone, jerking my arm, but I kept walking. I could hear the beep of a construction truck backing up to the cottage I had just left. They weren't wasting a second. As I reached the heavy iron gates, the automatic lock clicked shut behind me with a metallic thud. I stood on the sidewalk, shivering in my thin coat, looking back at the mansion that glowed with warm golden light. I could see silhouettes moving in the windows, dancing, celebrating. I was outside. They were inside. It was exactly how they had always wanted it. The cold rain seeping into my bones triggered a memory, vivid and warm, transporting me back 15 years. I was 17, sitting in Grandpa's private study during a blizzard. The fire was crackling and Grandpa Otis was holding a delicate, dusty vase. It looked plain, almost ugly, with faded paint and a chipped rim. "How much do you think this is worth, Nia?" he had asked. I looked at it critically. "Maybe $50 at a flea market," I guessed. "It looks damaged." Grandpa smiled, that twinkle in his eye that always meant I was about to learn a lesson. He set the vase down gently. "On the surface, yes. To the untrained eye, it is junk. But this is a Ming Dynasty prototype. The value isn't in how pretty it looks on a shelf. The value is in the history, the provenance, and the fact that only 3 exist in the world." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "Listen to me, Naya. People like your brother, they look at the price tag. They chase the flash, the shiny cars, the big mansions. They think wealth is what you can show off. But real power is invisible. It is in the fine print. It is in the assets nobody notices because they are too busy looking at the diamonds. Always look for control, not just value. Liquidity and control. That is the key. Never forget that." The memory faded as a car splashed a puddle of freezing water onto my legs, snapping me back to reality. Liquidity and control. The words echoed in my mind. I looked down at my pocket, where the envelope sat dry and safe against my hip. Grandpa didn't leave me junk. He didn't make mistakes. I hailed a taxi, ignoring the driver's look of disdain at my soaked clothes, and gave him the address of a 24-hour diner on the edge of the city. I needed light and I needed coffee. The diner was empty except for a truck driver dozing in a booth. I slid into a seat in the back corner, the red vinyl cracked and taped over. I ordered black coffee and waited until the waitress disappeared into the kitchen before I pulled the envelope out. My hands were trembling, not from the cold anymore, but from adrenaline. I spread the 2 bills out on the sticky table. $100, $10. a total of 110. It seemed so insignificant, but I remembered the lesson. Look past the surface. I reached into my purse and pulled out my archivist's kit. It was a small leather pouch I carried everywhere containing white cotton gloves, a magnifying loupe, and a small high-powered UV flashlight. I slipped the loupe to my eye and leaned over the $10 bill. To anyone else, it was just a Hamilton. But under 10x magnification, I saw it. There were tiny, almost microscopic pinpricks above the serial number. They weren't random. They were a pattern. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I clicked on the UV flashlight and shone the purple beam onto the bill. I gasped, the sound loud in the quiet diner. The bill lit up, but it wasn't the standard security strip. Written in a special fluorescent ink that Grandpa used to use for marking high-priority cargo crates back in the 80s, a sequence of numbers glowed neon blue across the face of the bill. It wasn't just numbers. It was coordinates. And a routing number. And a single word written in Grandpa's distinct, jagged handwriting right across Hamilton's eyes: leverage. I sat back, my breath catching in my throat. This wasn't lunch money. This was a breadcrumb trail. The routing number didn't belong to a commercial bank. I recognized the prefix from my work in the archives. It belonged to the Sovereign Private Vaults, a Swiss institution that didn't advertise and didn't accept walk-in clients. You didn't just open an account there with money, you needed a legacy. And the coordinates pointed to their underground facility in downtown Manhattan. I looked at the $100 bill next. Under the UV light, the gold seal turned a deep blood red. And there was another message, shorter, simpler. Trust, 1928. My mind raced. 1928 was the year the gold certificates were issued, but it was also the year Grandpa's father started the very first logistics route with a single truck. The trust. The family trust. Everyone assumed the trust was dissolved years ago when the company went public. But if this bill existed, if these codes were fresh, then the trust was still active. I took a sip of the bitter, lukewarm coffee, but it tasted like victory. Darius thought he had won the empire because he held the title of CEO. He thought he owned the real estate because his name was on the deeds. But he forgot the most basic rule of finance that Grandpa tried to teach him 1,000 times. You can own the car, but if the bank holds the loan, the bank owns you. And if my suspicions were right, this $110 made me the bank. I carefully packed the bills back into the envelope, treating them with the reverence of a holy relic. I wasn't just a broke girl sitting in a cheap diner anymore. I was a hunter who had just found the scent. I pulled out my phone. It was cracked from the fall in the cottage, but it still worked. I had one contact who could help me verify this before the banks opened in the morning. An old friend of Grandpa's, a forensic accountant named Saul, who had been pushed out by Darius years ago. I typed a text, my fingers flying. Grandpa left me the 1928 series. I found the blue ink. Meet me at dawn. I stared out the window at the rain washing the grime off the city streets. Let Courtney have the guest house. Let Darius have the big chair and the empty title. They were celebrating in a house of cards and they had just handed me the wind. I wasn't going to just survive this. I was going to repossess everything. The waitress came by to refill my cup. "You okay, hun? You look like you're plotting a murder," she joked, noting my intense expression. I looked up at her and smiled, a genuine, dangerous smile that felt new on my face. "No," I said softly. "Just a foreclosure." The radiator in my new apartment hissed like an angry cat, a rhythmic clanking sound that promised to keep me awake all night. I had found the place on Craigslist, a fourth-floor walk-up, in a neighborhood where the streetlights flickered and the sirens never seemed to stop. The rent was cheap, which was good because after paying the deposit and the first month my savings account was looking as bleak as the peeling beige paint on the walls. I sat on the floor surrounded by cardboard boxes, eating a cup of instant noodles that tasted mostly of salt and regret. It was a far cry from the silk sheets and chef-prepared meals of the Otis estate. But as I looked around the cramped studio, I felt a strange sense of peace. This was mine. No one could kick me out of here. My phone buzzed on the floor beside me. Against my better judgment, I picked it up. It was a notification from Instagram. Courtney had just posted a story. I tapped the screen, and suddenly my dingy room was illuminated by the high-definition glow of my family's excess. The video was shaky, accompanied by loud, thumping bass music. It showed Darius standing in the driveway of a luxury dealership, his arm draped around the hood of a brand-new neon-green McLaren. He was grinning, his teeth white against his tan, holding a bottle of champagne that probably cost more than my entire lease. The caption read, "New toy for the new CEO. #legacy, #boss moves." I swiped to the next slide. It was Courtney filming herself in the passenger seat, the wind whipping her hair as they sped down the highway. "Life comes at you fast," she shouted over the engine's roar, blowing a kiss to the camera. "We are just getting started, baby." I watched as the video cut to them at a nightclub ordering bottle service, surrounded by people who used to ignore them when Grandpa was alive. They were burning through cash like it was kindling. I clicked on a live stream that Darius had started an hour ago. He was sitting in a VIP booth, slightly sweaty and visibly intoxicated, talking to a group of sycophants. You know, he was saying, gesturing wildly with a cigar. The old man sat on so much dead weight. "We have these warehouses on the south side, just acres of rotting brick. I told the broker this morning, sell them. Liquidate it all. We need cash flow, not storage for rats." My stomach dropped. The south side warehouses were not rotting brick. They were the original distribution hubs Grandpa had built in the 50s. They sat on prime industrial land that was slated for rezoning next year. Grandpa had held on to them specifically because their value was about to triple. Darius was selling them for pennies on the dollar to buy sports cars and overpriced vodka. He was cannibalizing the empire to feed his ego. I turned the phone off, tossing it onto the mattress. I couldn't watch them dismantle my grandfather's legacy, one bottle service at a time. I turned my attention to the only inheritance I had received. The envelope lay on the small, scratched wooden table I had scavenged from the curb. I put on my white cotton gloves, the ones I used at the museum for handling delicate manuscripts. Under the harsh light of a single naked bulb hanging from the ceiling, the money looked even more mysterious. I picked up the $100 bill first. It was a Series 1928 gold certificate. Most people didn't know that these bills were once redeemable for actual gold coins. They were rare, valuable to collectors, but illegal to own for a long time after the gold standard was dropped. Grandpa had kept this pristine. I pulled out my magnifying loupe and leaned in close. The engraving was exquisite, far sharper than modern money. But it was the serial number that caught my eye. It didn't follow the standard treasury pattern for that year. I cross-referenced it with a database on my laptop, typing furiously. Nothing. It was a custom print. A forgery. No, Grandpa wouldn't leave me a fake. It was a modification. I held the UV light over it again, tracing the invisible ink I had seen in the diner. Just then my phone rang again. The name on the screen made me flinch. Evelyn. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. I cleared my throat, trying to sound stronger than I felt. "Hello, Evelyn. Nia, darling." Her voice was a symphony of fake concern, high-pitched and breathless. "I have been worried sick about you. We didn't know where you went. The storm was so awful last night. I hope you found somewhere suitable." "I am fine, Evelyn," I said, staring at the glowing blue numbers under my blacklight. "I found a place. What do you want?" "Oh, don't be so cold," she purred. "I am just calling to check on you. You know, despite everything, we are still family. It is just... Well, Darius is in such a mood about the renovation, and we were clearing out Otis's private study. We found that old mahogany cabinet in the corner. The one with the intricate carving. I knew exactly which cabinet she meant. It was Grandpa's favorite. He kept his private journals there." "Yes," I said. "I know it." "Well, it is locked," she said, her voice dropping a register, losing some of the sweetness. "And we can't seem to find the key." Darius wants to pry it open with a crowbar, but I told him that would damage the wood. I was wondering, since you spent so much time with Otis, did he ever give you a key? Maybe a small brass one? Or perhaps he hid it in the guest cottage? I almost laughed. She didn't care about me. She thought Grandpa had hidden diamonds or cash in that cabinet. She was scavenging for crumbs. I don't have the key, Evelyn, I lied smoothly. And I cleaned out the cottage. There is nothing there. Maybe ask Darius to use his new credit card to hire a locksmith. I am sure he can afford it. There was a pause. I could hear her breathing sharp and irritated. You are being very difficult, Nia. We are just trying to settle the estate. If you have anything of ours. I hung up. I blocked the number. I didn't have time for her petty greed. I had a puzzle to solve. I turned back to the bills. The $10 bill had the coordinates. The $100 bill had the routing number. I typed the routing number into the banking search engine, but it came back as invalid. That was impossible. Grandpa didn't make mistakes. I stared at the numbers again. 0205. It wasn't a US routing number. It was international. I switched my search to European banking codes. My heart skipped a beat when the search result loaded. The code belonged to a specific institution. The Sovereign Private Vaults of Zurich, New York branch. This wasn't a commercial bank where you opened a checking account. This was a fortress for the ultra-high net worth individuals of the world. Dictators, royalty, and old money families who wanted their assets to vanish from the public eye stored their wealth there. It was a place that didn't have a sign on the door. You had to know it existed to find it. I looked at the coordinates on the $10 bill. They pointed to a nondescript gray stone building in the financial district, a place I had walked past 1,000 times without noticing. It was invisible in plain sight, just like me. I sat back, the adrenaline warming me more than the hissing radiator ever could. Grandpa hadn't just left me money. He had left me an identity. To get into that vault, I couldn't walk in as Nia the archivist in a thrift store coat. I needed to walk in as the heir to a secret kingdom. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. Tired eyes, messy hair. Tomorrow that had to change. Darius was out there buying depreciating assets and flashy toys, thinking he was a king. He had no idea that while he was playing checkers, Grandpa had just handed me the board for a game of 3D chess. I turned off the light, clutching the bills in my hand. Tomorrow I was going to the bank. And I prayed that $110 was enough to buy my way through the front door. The morning sun did not reach the pavement of the financial district, where the shadows of skyscrapers turned the streets into concrete canyons. I stood in front of the building at the coordinates I had deciphered. It was an unassuming structure made of heavy gray stone with no signage, no ATM in the lobby, and no revolving doors. There was just a heavy steel door and a security guard who looked like he had been carved out of granite. I took a deep breath. I was wearing my best pair of black slacks and a clean white button-down shirt, but my coat was threadbare at the cuffs and my boots were scuffed from years of walking. In a neighborhood where shoes cost more than my rent, I stuck out like a sore thumb. I walked up the 3 marble steps toward the entrance. The guard did not even look up from his clipboard at first. He just extended a hand to block my path, his palm like a stop sign. Deliveries are around the back. He grunted, his voice flat and bored. I am not a delivery driver, I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. I am here to access a safe deposit box. The guard finally looked at me. His eyes swept over my outfit, lingering on my cheap coat. He let out a short, derisive breath through his nose. Miss, this is the Sovereign Private Vaults. We don't have safe deposit boxes for the public. This facility is for members only. I think you are looking for the Citibank on the corner. I did not move. I am a member, I said, reaching into my pocket. Or rather, my grandfather was. The guard stepped closer, looming over me, his hand resting instinctively on his belt. Look, I don't want to cause a scene, but you need to leave. We have a very strict loitering policy. If you don't step back to the sidewalk, I will have to escort you. He was reaching for his radio to call for backup. I knew I had seconds before I was thrown out. I pulled the envelope from my pocket and withdrew the $10 bill. I held it up, pressing it flat against his chest, so he had to look at it. "Look at the serial number," I commanded, channeling every ounce of authority Grandpa Otis had ever displayed. The guard blinked, annoyed, about to push my hand away. Then he froze. In the morning light, the faint blue ink I had seen under the UV light was barely visible, but the specific sequence of numbers caught his eye. He stopped reaching for his radio. He frowned, leaning in closer. Suddenly, the heavy steel door behind him swung open. A man in an immaculate charcoal suit stepped out. He was older, with silver hair, and the kind of posture that suggested he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. He looked at the guard, then at me, and then his eyes locked onto the bill in my hand. His face went pale. The color drained from his cheeks so fast I thought he might faint. He rushed forward, pushing the massive guard aside as if he were a rag doll. "Miss Otis." The man breathed, his voice trembling with an emotion I could not place. Was it fear? Was it relief? He looked at me with wide eyes. "I have been the branch manager here for 20 years. My name is Arthur Sterling. We have been waiting for this bill to reappear for a decade." The guard looked between us, confused. "Mr. Sterling, this woman was just trying to—" "Silence!" Mr. Sterling snapped, not taking his eyes off me. "Open the door. Now." He turned to me and did something that made the passers-by on the street stop and stare. He bowed. It was not a nod. It was a deep, respectful bow from the waist. "Please, Miss Otis. Forgive the reception. We did not know the air had been chosen. Follow me." I walked past the stunned guard clutching my $10 and followed Mr. Sterling into the lobby. The air inside smelled of expensive polish and old money. It was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy. We took a private elevator down 3 floors into the earth. When the doors opened, we were in a room lined with floor-to-ceiling steel boxes. Mr. Sterling led me to a large box at the end of the row, number 1928. He produced 2 keys from his jacket pocket, inserted them, and turned. The lock clicked with a heavy, satisfying thud. He pulled the long metal drawer out and carried it to a private viewing table. He gestured for me to sit. I opened the lid. I expected to see stacks of cash, or maybe gold bars. Instead, there was just a thick stack of documents bound in leather. I picked up the top document. The title read, "Otis Legacy Trust." Underneath lay a stack of certificates. I recognized them immediately from my business history classes, but I had never seen one in person. They were Class A super voting shares. I flipped through them. 1%, 5%, 51%. My hands started to shake. Mr. Sterling poured me a glass of water from a crystal pitcher. "You understand what you are holding, don't you, Miss Otis?" he asked softly. I nodded slowly. "These are voting shares. Grandpa didn't leave the company to Darius." "No," Mr. Sterling corrected me gently. "He did leave the company to Darius. Your brother owns the operating entity. He owns the trucks, the logo, the buildings. He is the face of the company." Mr. Sterling pulled out a second document, a loan agreement dated 10 years ago. "But this," he said, pointing to the paper, "this is the debt. 10 years ago, when the company was struggling, your grandfather moved all the company's liabilities, all its loans, and all its mortgages into this private trust. He became the bank for his own company." He looked me in the eye, his expression grave. "Your brother owns the company, Miss Otis. But this trust owns the company's debt. And right here in Clause 4B, it states that if the operating CEO demonstrates fiscal irresponsibility or ethical failure, the trust has the right to call in the loans immediately." I read the clause. It was brutal. It meant that if the CEO messed up, the lender could demand full repayment of hundreds of millions of dollars within 24 hours. And if they couldn't pay, if they cannot pay, Mr. Sterling finished my thought, a small grim smile touching his lips. Then the trust has the right to seize all assets to satisfy the debt. The trucks, the warehouses, the brand, everything. He leaned back. Your grandfather told me that one day someone would walk in with that $10 bill. He said that if that person was Darius, I was to burn these papers. But if it was you, I was to give you the button. The button, I asked. The foreclosure button, Mr. Sterling said. Your brother is currently leveraging the company to buy sports cars and fund parties. He is technically in violation of the ethical clause as we speak. You have the power to bankrupt him before lunch, Miss Otis. The question is, are you ready to pull the trigger? I looked down at the papers. I thought of Darius laughing at my cheap coat. I thought of Courtney breaking my picture frame. I thought of them throwing me out into the rain. I ran my finger over the signature line. I didn't feel fear anymore. I felt like a judge who had just been handed the gavel. I am not just ready, Mr. Sterling, I said, picking up the pen. I am overdue. Let's get to work. While I was sitting in the silent steel-lined vault in the financial district signing my name to documents that would reshape the future of Otis Logistics, my brother Darius was sitting in a glass-walled conference room 50 floors above Midtown Manhattan. He was about to make the biggest mistake of his short tenure as CEO, and he was doing it with a smile on his face. The deal was supposed to be simple. Darius had arranged to sell the Southside Distribution Center, a sprawling complex of red brick warehouses that had been the heart of our grandfather's operation for 40 years. He called them rotting assets. He called them an eyesore. But to the developers sitting across the table from him, they were $50 million worth of prime real estate, destined to become luxury condos. Darius sat at the head of the table, his suit jacket unbuttoned, looking every inch the arrogant heir. He tapped his gold fountain pen against the mahogany surface, impatient to sign the deed. Next to him, Courtney was already browsing real estate listings in the Hamptons, on her tablet. Mentally spending the commission she convinced Darius to give her for brokering the deal. The buyers were a group of sharks from a private equity firm, men who smelled blood in the water and knew that Darius was desperate for cash to fund his lavish lifestyle. They had lowballed him, and he had taken the bait because he wanted the quick payout. All right, gentlemen, Darius announced, his voice booming with false confidence. Let's get this over with. I have a tea time at 1 o'clock, and my new McLaren isn't going to drive itself. He reached for the stack of contracts, flourishing his signature on the first page with aggressive strokes. He signed page after page, the scratching of his pen the only sound in the room. When he reached the final document, the deed transfer, he looked up at the notary, a stern woman named Mrs. Higgins, who was monitoring the transaction on a secure laptop. We are good to go, right? Darius asked, sliding the papers toward her. Just authorize the wire transfer. Mrs. Higgins did not answer immediately. She was frowning at her screen, tapping a few keys with increasing urgency. A small red alert bar had appeared on her monitor. She adjusted her glasses and typed again. Is there a problem? Darius asked, his smile faltering slightly. One moment, Mr. Otis, she said, her voice professional but cold. The system is flagging a hold on the title. Darius laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. That is impossible. I am the CEO. I own the title. It is probably just a system error. Reboot your computer or something. Mrs. Higgins turned the laptop screen toward the buyer's attorney. It is not a system error, sir. The title has been frozen. There is an active lien on this property. It was filed 18 minutes ago. The room went deadly silent. The lead buyer, a man with eyes like flint, closed his folder. You told us this property was unencumbered, Darius. It is unencumbered, Darius shouted, standing up so abruptly his chair tipped over. I am the sole heir to the business assets. My grandfather left it all to me. Who the hell put a lien on my property? Mrs. Higgins read from the screen. The lien holder is listed as the Otis Legacy Trust. Darius froze. The trust. He knew the trust existed, of course. It was the entity that held the family's wealth. But he assumed in his arrogance that because he was the CEO of the company, he controlled the trust as well. He had never bothered to read the bylaws. That is me. Darius sputtered, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. I am the Otis Legacy Trust. I am Otis. This is ridiculous. I am authorizing the sale right now. Override it. I cannot override it, sir, Mrs. Higgins said, closing her laptop. The trust is a separate legal entity from the operating company. The lien requires the signature of the trustee for any asset disposal over $1 million. Without that signature, this building does not belong to you to sell. It belongs to the bank. The buyers stood up. Their lead negotiator looked at Darius with pure disgust. Call us when you actually own the things you are trying to sell, kid. Until then, don't waste our time. They walked out, taking their $50 million check with them. Darius stood there shaking with rage, humiliated in front of his wife and his staff. He grabbed his phone and dialed Mr. Vance, the family attorney. He put it on speaker, wanting everyone to hear him berate the lawyer. Vance, Darius screamed the moment the line connected. What kind of game are you playing? I just lost a $50 million deal because some computer glitch says the trust has a lien on my warehouses. Fix it. Now. Mr. Vance's voice came through the speaker, calm and unbothered. It is not a glitch, Darius. It is a safeguard. Safeguard against what? Darius roared. Safeguard against you, Vance replied smoothly. Your grandfather anticipated that his successor might try to liquidate the company's core assets for quick cash. He inserted a clause in the corporate charter. The clause of preservation. All major assets are technically collateral for the company's debt, which is held by the trust. You cannot sell them without the consent of the trust's voting shareholder. I am the voting shareholder, Darius yelled, kicking the overturned chair. No, Darius Vance said, and I could almost hear the smile in his voice. You are the operational manager. You own the common stock. You do not own the Class A super voting shares. Those were held in a dormant vault until a specific condition was met. What condition? Darius demanded, pacing the room like a caged animal. The condition of a worthy successor appearing, Vance said cryptically. As of this morning, that condition has been met. The Class A shares have been claimed. The trust has a new active chairman, and this chairman has invoked their right to freeze all asset liquidation until a full financial audit is conducted. Darius stopped pacing. He looked at Courtney, who was staring at him with wide, terrified eyes. A new chairman. Someone else had the power. Someone else was pulling the strings. Who is it? Darius whispered, his voice trembling with fury. Who claimed the shares? Was it a competitor? Is it someone from the board? I am not at liberty to disclose that information yet, Vance said. The chairman has requested anonymity for the time being, but they did leave a message. They said that the Southside warehouses are not for sale, and that you should focus on increasing logistics efficiency rather than buying sports cars. Darius let out a scream of pure frustration. He grabbed a crystal vase from the center of the conference table and hurled it against the wall, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. Find them, Vance, he bellowed into the phone. I want to know who is blocking my money. I want to know who thinks they can steal my company. I don't care what it costs. Hire private investigators. Hack the bank records. I want a name. I am going to destroy them. Darius stood in the wreckage of the conference room chest, heaving, convinced he was fighting a corporate war against a titan of industry. He imagined a rival CEO in a high-rise office or a secret billionaire plotting his downfall. He had no idea that the person who had just brought his $50 million deal to a screeching halt was currently sitting on a lumpy mattress in a fourth-floor walk-up, eating instant noodles with a plastic fork, watching the rain streak against a dirty window. He was screaming for a name, but he never once thought to whisper mine. The war had begun, and the general of the opposing army was the sister he had left out in the cold. While Darius was busy destroying his office in a fit of impotent rage, his wife Courtney was 3 miles uptown on Madison Avenue, blissfully unaware that the ground beneath her stiletto heels had already crumbled. She was doing what she did best, which was spending money that did not belong to her to impress people who did not like her. She was accompanied by Sloane and Tiffany, 2 women from the charity gala circuit, who were known for their shark-like ability to smell blood in the water. Courtney knew that rumors were swirling about the will. She knew people were whispering that the Otis fortune was not as secure as it appeared. So she had decided to silence the gossip in the only language these women understood: excessive consumption. They were standing in the private viewing room of the Hermès boutique, surrounded by the smell of buttery leather and quiet judgment. Courtney had selected 5 bags, not one, but 5. 2 Birkins in ostrich skin, a Kelly in electric blue alligator, and 2 smaller clutches for evening wear. The total came to $128,000. It was an obscene amount of money for a Tuesday afternoon, but Courtney didn't even blink. She wanted Sloane and Tiffany to see that the Otis tap was flowing freely. "Wrap them up," Courtney said, waving her hand dismissively at the sales associate, a pristine young man named Laurent, who had helped her spend $500,000 over the last 3 years. "And have them delivered to the penthouse. I don't want to carry anything today." She reached into her purse and pulled out the heavy black titanium American Express Centurion card. This card was the ultimate status symbol. It was supposed to have no limit. It was tied directly to the corporate expense account of Otis Logistics, categorized under client relations. Courtney slapped the card onto the glass counter with a satisfying clack. Sloane raised an eyebrow, feigning admiration. "Wow, Court, 5 bags. Is Darius celebrating a big merger or something?" Courtney laughed, tossing her hair back. "Oh, you know Darius. He just wants me to be happy. Business is booming. We are actually thinking of buying a private island in the Caribbean next month." Laurent picked up the card with white-gloved hands and inserted it into the chip reader. The machine beeped. A processing circle spun on the screen. And spun. And spun. The silence in the room stretched thin. Courtney tapped her foot impatiently. The machine beeped again. A harsh double tone that sounded like a game show buzzer for a wrong answer. Laurent frowned. He pulled the card out and wiped the chip on his sleeve. "Apologies, Madame Otis," he murmured. "The technology is a bit temperamental today. Let me try again." He inserted the card. Again the processing circle. Again the harsh rejection tone. This time a message flashed in red letters on the customer-facing screen. Courtney felt a prickle of heat on the back of her neck. Sloane and Tiffany were exchanging glances. Tiffany pretended to be interested in a silk scarf, but Courtney knew she was listening to every beep. "Try it again!" Courtney snapped, her voice rising an octave. "There is nothing wrong with that card. It has a limit of $5 million. Laurent looked at the screen, and for the first time in 3 years, his professional mask slipped. He looked uncomfortable. He looked pitying. "Madam, the card has not been declined for a connection error. The message from the issuer is quite specific." He hesitated, lowering his voice, but in the acoustic perfection of the private room, it sounded like a shout. "The code is for fiscal irresponsibility/management hold. The account has been suspended by the primary administrator." The air left the room. Sloane let out a small, audible gasp. Fiscal irresponsibility. It was a phrase that didn't just mean broke. It meant untrustworthy. It meant the adults had taken the credit card away from the child. Courtney's face turned a violent shade of crimson. "That is a lie," she screeched, snatching the card back. "My husband is the CEO. He is the administrator. Run it again. Or use the Visa." She fumbled in her wallet, pulling out a platinum Visa, then a gold MasterCard, throwing them onto the counter in a panic. Laurent tried the Visa. Declined. He tried the MasterCard. Declined. "Pick up card," he read from the screen. "Madame, I am afraid I have to keep this one. The bank has ordered a confiscation." Sloane stepped forward, placing a hand on Courtney's shoulder. Her touch felt like ice. "Oh, honey, this is so embarrassing. Do you want me to cover it? I know things have been tricky since Otis died." The fake concern was worse than a slap in the face. Courtney jerked away. "I don't need your charity, Sloane. It is a system glitch. Darius is probably updating the security protocols. I have to call him." She stormed out of the boutique, leaving the 5 bags on the counter and her dignity on the floor. She stood on the sidewalk of Madison Avenue, hands shaking so hard she could barely unlock her phone. She dialed Darius. "Pick up, pick up, pick up!" she hissed. Darius answered on the second ring, sounding breathless and angry. "What, Courtney? I am dealing with a crisis here." "You are dealing with a crisis," she screamed into the phone, ignoring the passers-by who were staring at her. "I am at Hermes. They just declined the black card. They said the administrator put a hold on it for bad management. Sloan and Tiffany are looking at me like I am a pauper. Darius, fix it." Darius went silent for a second. "I didn't put a hold on it," he said, his voice dropping. "It is the trust. They froze the assets, they blocked the warehouse sale, and now they must have hit the credit lines." "What do you mean, the trust?" Courtney demanded, pacing in a tight circle. "You are the trust." "I am not the trust, okay?" Darius snapped, his voice cracking. "Someone else is. Someone invoked a clause. I don't know who it is. Vance is trying to find out. Just use your personal debit card, Courtney. My personal card has a daily limit of 5,000. Darius. These bags are 100,000. Courtney felt tears of rage pricking her eyes. "So I just have to walk away. I have to go back in there and tell them I can't afford it. Just leave the store, Courtney. Go home. We will fix this tomorrow." Darius hung up. Courtney stared at the phone. She couldn't go back in there. She couldn't face them. She turned and began to walk quickly down the street, head down, hailing a taxi, because her Uber account was linked to the same frozen credit card. She felt naked, exposed. For the first time in her life, the shield of money was gone. Across the city, in a small, quiet office I had rented with the first disbursement from the trust, I sat in front of a dual monitor setup. On the left screen was the live feed of the Otis Logistics expense accounts. On the right was a bowl of microwave popcorn. I watched the red notifications stack up. Attempted charge Hermes, $128,000. Declined. Attempted charge the Ritz-Carlton booking, $5,000. Declined. Attempted charge Uber Black, $85. Declined. Mr. Sterling sat across from me, reviewing the bylaws. "You know, Miss Otis," he said, looking over his spectacles. "You could have just lowered the limit, freezing the cards entirely with the code for mismanagement. That is quite aggressive. It sends a flag to every credit bureau in the country. Their credit scores will drop 50 points by morning." I took a piece of popcorn and chewed it slowly. "Darius fired 20 employees last week to save money, Mr. Sterling. He cut the healthcare benefits for the warehouse workers, and today his wife tried to buy alligator bags worth 3 times my annual salary. This isn't aggression, this is triage. I am stopping the bleeding." I typed a command into the secure terminal. "Action freeze all auxiliary family accounts. Reason asset protection." I hit enter. The satisfaction was cold, hard, and absolute. I picked up my burner phone. I had one more message to send. I knew Courtney. I knew that right now she wasn't crying because she was broke. She was crying because she was confused. She needed a reason. She needed to know that this wasn't an accident. I typed the number. I didn't have her saved, but I knew it by heart. I typed a simple message. "Living on borrowed time is stressful, isn't it, sister-in-law? Maybe try a canvas tote bag next time. It is better for the environment. And your credit score." I hit send. I imagined the notification lighting up her phone screen as she sat in the back of a dirty yellow taxi. I imagined the fear turning into realization. They weren't fighting a ghost anymore. The ghost was talking back. And she knew exactly what kind of bags Courtney liked. The game had shifted. I wasn't just the sister they kicked out. I was the one holding the purse strings, and I had just pulled them tight. The basement archives of the New York City History Museum were my fortress of solitude. While the world above ground was noisy and chaotic down here, amidst the rows of steel shelving and the scent of decaying paper, everything was orderly. I was in the middle of cataloging a collection of Civil War-era letters when the silence was shattered. It wasn't the sound of a cannon, but something far more destructive. The distinct, sharp click of designer heels on concrete. I froze, my gloved hand hovering over a fragile manuscript. I knew that walk. It was a walk that demanded attention, a walk that said, I own this floor, even though I have never set foot here before. I turned slowly to see Evelyn standing in the doorway of my workspace. She looked different. The usually impeccable step matriarch of the Otis clan was showing cracks in her porcelain veneer. Her Chanel suit was from last season, a travesty she would never have permitted before the accounts were frozen. Her hair, usually sprayed into an immovable helmet of blonde perfection, had a few loose strands escaping near her temples. She was clutching her alligator Birkin bag so tightly, her knuckles were white. When she saw me, her face crumpled into a mask of tragic despair that would have won her a Daytime Emmy Award. Nia, she choked out, rushing toward me with her arms outstretched. Oh, thank God I found you. The security guard tried to stop me, but I told him it was a family emergency. I stood my ground, not stepping forward to accept the hug. I carefully removed my white cotton gloves and placed them on the table. Hello, Evelyn, I said, my voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. What are you doing here? I thought I made it clear I didn't want visitors. Evelyn stopped a few feet away, dropping her arms when she realized I wasn't going to embrace her. She pulled a lace handkerchief from her sleeve and dabbed at eyes that remained suspiciously dry. It is Darius, she whispered, her voice trembling. It is bad, Nia. It is so bad. I felt a flicker of genuine alarm for a nanosecond before I remembered who I was talking to. What happened? I asked, keeping my face neutral. Did the repo man take the McLaren? Evelyn let out a sob that sounded like a hiccup. Don't be cruel, Nia. This isn't about cars. It is his health. She looked around dramatically as if checking for spies in the empty archive. The stress of the succession, the pressure of the CEO role, it has triggered a dormant condition, a rare heart defect. He collapsed this morning. The doctors say he needs immediate surgery. Experimental surgery. In Zurich. I stared at her. Zurich? Of course. The home of the sovereign private vaults. It was almost poetic. I leaned back against my desk, crossing my arms. I am sorry to hear that, Evelyn. Is he in the hospital now? Because I follow him on Instagram, and 20 minutes ago, he posted a story of himself eating a Wagyu steak sandwich at Nobu. Evelyn didn't even blink. That is old footage, she stammered quickly. His social media manager posts those to keep up appearances. We can't let the shareholders know the CEO is dying. The stock would plummet. He is in a private clinic right now, hooked up to machines. She took a step closer, grabbing my hand with her cold, clammy fingers. We need money, Nia. The insurance won't cover the flight to Switzerland or the specialist. And because of this horrible freeze on the accounts, we can't access a dime. He is going to die if we don't pay the deposit by tonight. She reached into her oversized bag and pulled out a thick document. Her hands were shaking, but I noticed it wasn't from fear. It was from anticipation. I managed to get the lawyers to draft this, she said, thrusting the papers at me. It is a temporary waiver. If you sign this, it lifts the restriction on the trust just for medical expenses. It designates me as the emergency proxy for the funds. Just sign it, Nia. Save your brother's life. I took the document. I didn't need to read the fine print to know what it was. It wasn't a medical waiver. It was an abdication. It was a document that would transfer my voting rights to Evelyn under the guise of an emergency conservatorship. If I signed this, she wouldn't just pay for a fake surgery. She would drain the accounts, transfer the assets offshore, and leave me with nothing but the dust in this basement. I looked at her, really looked at her. Beneath the layer of expensive foundation, I saw a woman who was terrified. Not for her stepson, but for her lifestyle. She was starving for relevance, starving for control, and she was trying to eat me alive to get it. I slowly reached into my pocket and tapped the screen of my phone, ensuring the voice recorder app was running. I had turned it on the moment I heard her heels. "Evelyn," I said softly, flipping through the pages. "This says it gives you full power of attorney over the Otis Legacy Trust. That seems like a lot of power just to pay a hospital bill." Evelyn's eyes widened, her pupils dilating. "It is just legalese, darling. You know how lawyers are. It is the only way the bank will release the funds quickly. Once Darius is well, we can tear it up. I promise. Just sign it, please. Do you want his death on your conscience? Do you want to be the reason the Otis line ends?" I pretended to hesitate. I bit my lip. I looked at the pen she was holding out to me. I don't know, Evelyn. Grandpa left me that $110. Maybe I could just give you that cash, I still have it. Evelyn let out a sharp, derisive laugh before she could stop herself. The mask slipped completely. $110, she spat. "Are you stupid, Nia? We need millions." That pocket change wouldn't buy the aspirin for his headache, let alone heart surgery. "Stop playing games and sign the damn paper. You were never meant to handle this kind of responsibility anyway. You are a librarian. You arrange papers. Let the adults handle the money." There it was. The greed, the condescension, the truth. She didn't think Darius was sick. She just thought I was weak. I closed the folder. I didn't sign it. Instead, I placed it firmly on the desk behind me, out of her reach. "Evelyn," I said, my voice dropping the facade of confusion, "I think you should leave." Evelyn's face twisted. "What? Give me that paper." "No," I said calmly. "And you can tell Darius that if he really has a heart condition, he should probably stop eating red meat and stress buying real estate. But he won't be getting a dime from the trust. Not for this lie." Evelyn lunged for the desk, her nails clawing at the air. "You little brat! You ungrateful, selfish little—" I stepped in front of her. "I am the chairman of the board, Evelyn, and I am adding this conversation to the official audit record. Attempted fraud is a felony. Do you want me to call the police, or do you want to find your own way out?" Evelyn froze. She looked at my phone, which was now visible in my hand, the red recording bar pulsing. She realized she had walked into a trap. She straightened her jacket, her face pale with rage. "You will regret this, Nia. When Darius finds out—" "Darius is already finding out," I interrupted. "I just forwarded the audio file to his email. I imagine he will be very interested to hear that you told me he was on his deathbed just so you could get your hands on the checkbook." Evelyn gasped. She looked at me with pure hatred, turned on her heel, and fled. I listened to her footsteps fade away faster and less confident than when she arrived. I picked up the document she left behind and dropped it into the shredder. As the machine buzzed, eating the lies she had constructed, I thought about her comment. She said my money wouldn't even buy aspirin. I pulled the envelope out of my pocket, the one holding the bills that gave me the power to crush them. I looked at the face of Alexander Hamilton on the $10 bill. Evelyn was wrong. This money wasn't useless. It was the most potent cure in the world for the sickness that plagued my family. I picked up my phone and dialed Mr. Sterling. "Mr. Sterling," I said when he answered. "I just had a visit from my stepmother. It seems there is a medical emergency in the family." "Oh dear," Mr. Sterling said. "Is it serious?" "Very," I replied, watching the last strip of Evelyn's fraud fall into the wastebasket. "It appears my brother and stepmother are suffering from a severe case of delusion. And you know what, Mr. Sterling? She was right. I shouldn't keep this $110. I think I will use it to buy the medicine Darius truly needs." "And what medicine is that, Miss Otis?" "Foreclosure," I said. "Initiate the asset seizure protocols. Take the house, take the cars, take everything. It is time for his treatment to begin." The 34th floor of the Otis Logistics Tower was designed to intimidate. It was all glass chrome and panoramic views of the city that my family had helped build. But on Wednesday morning, the intimidation factor had vanished, replaced by the chaotic energy of a trading floor during a crash. I wasn't there physically, of course. I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop 3 blocks away, watching the live stream from the security camera inside my brother's office. Accessing the system had been childishly easy. Darius hadn't changed the admin password since 2018 because he couldn't be bothered to memorize new ones. On my screen, I watched the dismantling of an empire in real time. Darius was pacing back and forth, his tie loosened, sweat visible on his forehead, even through the grainy footage. He was shouting into his headset, his voice cracking with a desperation he had never known before. "What do you mean they are pulling the contract?" he yelled. "We have a 5-year agreement with Global Freight. They can't just walk away." I sipped my latte, knowing exactly why they were walking away. I had sent an anonymous tip to Global Freight's compliance officer the night before, attaching the public record of the lien on the warehouses. No major corporation would risk their supply chain with a logistics partner whose assets were frozen by a creditor. Darius slammed the phone down onto the receiver so hard I thought it might break. He looked at his VP of operations, a man named Miller, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on Earth. "They are citing instability," Darius spat. "Who told them? Who is spreading these lies?" Miller cleared his throat nervously. "It is not just global, sir. We just lost the Midwest distribution deal, and the fuel suppliers. They are demanding cash on delivery. They say our credit lines are suspended." "Cash on delivery!" Darius screamed, kicking a leather wastebasket across the room. "We are a billion-dollar company. We don't pay cash for diesel like some mom-and-pop trucking outfit. Fix it, Miller. Call the bank. Threaten to move our accounts." Miller looked down at his shoes. "Sir, the bank is the one who suspended the lines. They said the directive came from the trust." The trust again. Darius ran his hands through his hair, pulling at the roots. He looked like a cornered animal. He poured himself a drink, his hands shaking so badly the amber liquid splashed onto his expensive mahogany desk. He didn't even notice. He was convinced there was a conspiracy against him, a shadow enemy plotting a hostile takeover. In his mind, it was probably a rival CEO or a jealous board member. He never once suspected that the architect of his destruction was the sister he had mocked for reading too many books. Just then, his secretary buzzed in. Her voice was trembling. "Mr. Otis, there is a courier here. He says it is urgent legal correspondence." He refused to leave it at the front desk. "Send him in," Darius barked. "Maybe it is the lawsuit against the bank." A man in a dark suit walked in. He didn't look like a normal courier. He moved with the precision of an executioner. He placed a thick red envelope on the desk. "Mr. Darius Otis," he said formally. "You have been served. Notice of default and acceleration of debt from the Otis Legacy Trust." Darius ripped the envelope open. I zoomed in on the camera feed. I knew exactly what the letter said because I had dictated it to Mr. Sterling 2 hours ago. It was a formal demand for the immediate repayment of the principal loan amount, $200 million, payable within 48 hours. Failure to comply would result in the immediate forfeiture of all voting rights and the transfer of executive control to the trustee. 200 million, Darius whispered, the color draining from his face. In 48 hours. This is insanity. Nobody has that kind of liquidity lying around. He looked up at the courier. "Who sent this? Who is the trustee?" The courier didn't answer. He just turned and walked out. Darius dropped into his chair, the paper fluttering from his hand. He stared at the wall, his eyes wide and unseeing. He was doing the math. He had spent the cash reserves on bonuses and acquisitions. He had leveraged the stock. He was broke. Cash poor and asset rich, but the assets were in a cage and I held the key. Then came the rage. It started low, a guttural sound in his throat, and exploded into a scream that probably echoed down the elevator shaft. He stood up and swept everything off his desk. The computer monitor, the crystal decanter, the framed photo of him shaking hands with the mayor. It all crashed to the floor in a symphony of destruction. "There is a mole," he shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at Miller. "Someone is leaking our financials. Someone is feeding information to this trust." "Is it you, Miller? Are you working for them?" "No, sir." "I swear." Miller stammered, backing away toward the door. "Get out!" Darius screamed. "Get out, all of you! You are all incompetent. I will fix this myself." When the room was empty, Darius slumped against the wall, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor amidst the broken glass. He put his head in his hands. He looked small. For a moment, I almost felt a twinge of pity. But then I remembered the rain. I remembered the way he laughed when he threw my suitcase onto the driveway. I remembered him calling my life's work a waste of time. The pity evaporated, replaced by cold resolve. He hadn't learned his lesson yet. He still thought this was about money. He pulled his phone out. I watched him scroll through his contacts, bypassing his lawyers and his accountants. He stopped on a name. Courtney. He dialed. "Where are you?" he demanded the moment she picked up. "I don't care about your credit card drama. Listen to me. We are in trouble. Real trouble. We need a massive injection of capital, and we need it by Friday." I could hear Courtney's muffled voice on the other end, probably complaining about her humiliation at Hermes. Darius cut her off. "Shut up, Courtney. Listen, we are going to host a gala." A gala. I leaned closer to my screen. This was a new twist. "Yes," Darius said, his voice gaining a manic energy. "We will call it the Otis Foundation Annual Charity Ball. We will hold it at the estate tomorrow night. We will invite everyone. The Vanderbilts, the Rothschilds, the tech billionaires from Silicon Alley. We will pitch a new investment fund. A private equity opportunity in sustainable logistics. Something vague and green. We will get them to write checks on the spot. Deposits." He stood up, kicking aside a piece of broken glass. "It is a Ponzi scheme, essentially, but he was too desperate to care about the legalities. He needed cash to pay the trust. He was going to rob Peter to pay Paul, not realizing that Paul was actually his little sister." "You have one job, Courtney," he hissed into the phone. "Get the guest list. I don't care if you have to beg, borrow, or blackmail. I want the richest people in New York in our ballroom tomorrow night. If that room isn't full of whales, we lose everything. Do you understand? We will be on the street." He hung up and started pacing again, muttering to himself about catering and lighting, planning the deception that he believed would save him. I closed my laptop. A charity gala. It was perfect. He was gathering all the witnesses for his own execution in one room. He wanted the elite to see the Otis legacy. Well, I would make sure they saw it. I picked up my burner phone and texted Mr. Sterling. "The fish is taking the bait. He is organizing a gathering. Prepare the final dossier. We are going to the party." Darius thought he was throwing a lifeline. He didn't realize he was actually setting the stage for the grand finale. The gala would be the perfect place for the chairman of the trust to finally make an appearance. And unlike Courtney, I wouldn't need to worry about what to wear. I would be wearing the truth, and it was going to be the most expensive thing in the room. The courier arrived at my walk-up apartment at noon, carrying a thick envelope made of heavy cream cardstock. It was embossed with the Otis family crest in gold leaf. For a moment, I just held it, feeling the weight of the pretense inside. Darius and Courtney were hemorrhaging money, but they were still spending thousands on invitations to a party that was effectively a funeral for their careers. I tore open the seal, expecting to see a standard guest invitation, perhaps with a passive-aggressive note about the dress code. What I pulled out made me laugh out loud in my empty kitchen. It was not a ticket to the ballroom. It was a laminated plastic badge attached to a cheap nylon lanyard. Across the top in bold block letters it read, "Volunteer Staff." Underneath, in smaller font, it specified coat check attendant. There was a sticky note attached to the back in Courtney's handwriting. It read, "Since you are so good at organizing things, we thought you could make yourself useful. Wear black pants and a white shirt. Do not speak to the guests unless spoken to." I ran my thumb over the laminate. They wanted me there. They needed to humiliate me one last time. They wanted me to take the coats of the people who used to respect our grandfather while standing in the shadows watching Darius play the big shot. It was perfect. They had invited the executioner to the scaffold and asked her to hold their coats while they put their heads in the noose. I texted Mr. Sterling a picture of the badge. He replied instantly, "Wear it. It will make the reveal that much sweeter." While I was laughing at their pettiness across town, Darius was suffocating. I knew this because I had access to the security feeds in the mansion's study. The preparations for the gala were spiraling out of control. The florists were refusing to unload the white hydrangeas until they saw a wire transfer confirmation. The catering company, a high-end firm that had served every Otis family event for 3 decades, was currently packing up their trucks in the driveway because the 50% deposit check had bounced. Darius was sitting at the antique desk, his face a mask of sheer panic. Courtney was pacing the Persian rug, sobbing not about the impending bankruptcy, but about the lack of shrimp cocktail. "Darius, we cannot have a cash bar," she wailed. "The Vanderbilts are coming. If we make them pay for drinks, we are finished socially." "Shut up, Courtney," Darius roared, slamming his hand on the desk. "I am trying to fix it." He was on the phone with a predatory lender, a man who specialized in high-risk bridge loans with interest rates that bordered on criminal. "Listen," he was saying, his voice shaking. "The company is solid. It is just a liquidity timing issue. The trust is undergoing an audit, so the main accounts are temporarily inaccessible. But I have collateral." He paused, listening to the voice on the other end. I watched as his eyes darted around the room, looking at the legacy he was about to gamble away. "Yes," he whispered. "The house, the mansion. It is unencumbered. It is worth 15 million. I will sign a second mortgage right now. Just wire the 200,000 for the vendors." I watched him pick up the pen. This house had been in our family for 4 generations. It was where my father was born. It was where I learned to walk. It was the only asset Darius had left that wasn't tied to the company, and he was about to sign it away for a party. He signed the document, his hand trembling so violently the signature looked like a seismograph of an earthquake. Within minutes, the wire hit his personal account. He ran outside, waving his phone at the caterers, screaming that the money was there. He had saved the party, but he had lost his home. He just didn't know it yet, because the moment that gala ended, I intended to foreclose on the company, which would trigger a default on his personal guarantees. He was throwing a party in a house he had just evicted himself from. I turned off the feed. I had my own preparations to make. I was not going to wear black pants and a white shirt. I took the train uptown to an unmarked door on Fifth Avenue. It was the atelier of Madame Leclerc, a designer who had made suits for my grandfather for 40 years. She was a woman of discretion and taste, and she was one of the few people who knew exactly how much power Otis had really held. When I walked in, she looked up from her sketchpad. Her eyes swept over my worn coat, but she didn't sneer. She looked at my face. "You have his eyes," she said simply. "Mr. Sterling called me. He said you require armor." "Not armor," I said, walking past the racks of ready-to-wear gowns. "War paint." Madame Leclerc smiled a thin, knowing smile. She led me to the back room, where a single dress hung on a mannequin. It wasn't white, it wasn't pastel. It was a deep, midnight blue, almost black, the color of a bruising storm. It was tailored to perfection with sharp architectural lines that screamed power. It was made of a silk that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. I tried it on. For years, I had worn oversized sweaters and comfortable jeans, trying to make myself invisible, trying to take up less space so Darius and Courtney wouldn't target me. I had hunched my shoulders. I had looked at the floor. But as the silk settled against my skin, I felt my spine straighten. I looked in the three-way mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the little sister. She wasn't the archivist. She was the CEO. The dress fit like a second skin, but it felt like a weapon. Madame Leclerc handed me a pair of diamond earrings. "These were your grandmother's," she said softly. "Otis left them in my safe 10 years ago. He said to give them to the woman who would save his company." I put them on. The diamonds caught the light, cold and hard. I pulled my hair back, revealing the sharp line of my jaw. I didn't recognize myself. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. All that was left was the cold clarity of the ledger. I paid the bill with the trust's black card, the transaction clearing instantly. As I walked out onto Fifth Avenue, the wind caught the hem of my coat, but I didn't shiver. I hailed a cab not to go home, but to go to the office I had set up. I had one last document to print. Back in my apartment, I laid the dress out on the bed. Next to it, I placed the laminated volunteer staff badge. The contrast was laughable. They expected a servant to walk through those doors. They expected a mouse. I walked to the mirror one last time before going to sleep. The reflection showed a woman who had been pushed downstairs, kicked out of homes, and erased from photos. But tonight, that woman was dead. Tomorrow night, Darius and Courtney were going to meet the head of the Otis Legacy Trust. I picked up the badge and tossed it into the trash can. I wouldn't be checking coats. I would be checking balances. And as I turned off the light, I whispered into the darkness to a brother who couldn't hear me yet. Enjoy the shrimp cocktail, Darius. It cost you $15 million. I hope it tastes like victory, because it is going to be your last meal as a free man. It is time to collect the debt. The driveway of the Otis estate was lined with Bentleys and Rolls-Royces, a parade of wealth that stretched all the way to the main gates. From the outside, the mansion looked like a beacon of prosperity, its windows glowing with golden light music spilling out onto the manicured lawns. But I knew the truth. I knew that the catering trucks parked around the back had demanded cash up front, and the security team was only there because Darius had promised them double time next week. It was a masquerade ball, a fitting theme for a family that had been wearing masks for as long as I could remember. Tonight, however, I was the one wearing the mask, and unlike them, mine was about to come off. I stepped out of the black sedan I had hired, the gravel crunching under my heels. I wasn't entering through the service door this time. I walked up the grand staircase, the midnight blue silk of my gown rustling softly against the stone. The security guard at the door, a man who had stopped me just yesterday, glanced at my invitation. It was a VIP pass I had issued to myself through the trust. He scanned it, the light turned green, and he stepped aside with a nod. He didn't recognize the woman in the diamond earrings and the Venetian mask adorned with black feathers. He just saw money, and that was the only passport that mattered in this world. The ballroom was suffocatingly warm, filled with the scent of expensive perfume and desperation. I moved through the crowd like a shadow, observing the players on the board. Darius was holding court near the ice sculpture, a ridiculous carving of a lion that was already starting to melt, dripping water onto the parquet floor. He was wearing a gold mask that covered half his face, but it couldn't hide the sweat beading on his forehead. He was talking to a group of potential investors, his hands moving wildly as he spun his web of lies. "We are pivoting to sustainable tech," I heard him say, his voice too loud, too eager. "Otis, logistics isn't just moving boxes anymore. We are moving the future. Our Q3 projections show a 300% growth. It is a ground floor opportunity, gentlemen. The buy-in is $5 million, but for tonight only we are offering equity partners a seat at the table for two." I watched the investors exchange glances. They were skeptical, but greed is a powerful drug, and Darius was selling it by the pound. He looked manic, his eyes darting around the room, constantly checking the door, perhaps waiting for the police, or perhaps waiting for the miracle he thought he deserved. He had no idea that the person who could end his misery was standing 10 feet away, sipping sparkling water and counting the seconds. I turned to make my way toward the back of the room, intending to scout the layout before the speeches began. Suddenly, a sharp force struck my shoulder, sending my clutch slipping from my hand. A glass of red wine splashed across the skirt of the woman who had walked right into me. It was Courtney. She was wearing a silver gown that was tight enough to cut off circulation and a mask encrusted with rhinestones that caught the light in a blinding glare. She stared down at the red stain spreading on her expensive fabric, her mouth dropping open in horror. Then her eyes snapped up to mine, filled with a familiar venomous rage. "You clumsy idiot!" she shrieked, her voice cutting through the ambient chatter. "Look what you did! Do you have any idea how much this costs? This is custom Vera Wang." I stood perfectly still. I didn't apologize. I didn't scramble to help her clean it up. I just looked at her. Are you deaf? Courtney hissed, stepping closer, her finger jabbing the air near my face. I said, "Look at my dress. Who even are you? I don't recognize you. Who invited you? You must be one of the plus ones. Probably some assistant trying to snag a rich husband." She looked me up and down, her lip curling in disgust. God, look at that dress. It is so severe. You look like a funeral director. Get out of my face before I have security throw you out. Go find a waiter and get me some club soda. Now. The irony was delicious. She was barking orders at the woman who technically owned the dress she was wearing, the house she was standing in, and the very ground beneath her feet. She thought she was speaking to a nobody. She thought she was the queen of the castle disciplining an unruly servant. I felt a laugh bubbling up in my chest, but I swallowed it. It wasn't time yet. I leaned in close, my voice low and disguised behind the mask. "Accidents happen when you don't watch where you are going," I said calmly. "Maybe you should be more careful. Red wine stains are notoriously hard to get out. Almost as hard as debt." Courtney froze. She blinked, confusion warring with her anger. The tone of my voice, the lack of fear, it unsettled her. She opened her mouth to scream at me again, to demand my name, but the room suddenly went dark. The heavy chandeliers dimmed, leaving only the stage illuminated by a harsh white spotlight. A hush fell over the crowd. The music stopped. It was showtime. Courtney glared at me one last time. "You are lucky the speeches are starting," she whispered, her voice dripping with malice. "But don't think I will forget this. Find me a club soda or I will make sure you never attend a high society event in this city again." She turned and strutted away, pushing her way to the front of the stage to stand by her husband's side. She pasted a bright fake smile on her face, hiding the wine stain with her clutch, ever the supportive wife of the visionary CEO. I watched her go. I didn't move toward the bar. Instead, I turned and walked with purposeful strides toward the back of the ballroom, toward the heavy velvet curtains that concealed the audio-visual booth. The technician, a young guy named Mike, who I had known for years, looked up as I slipped inside the small, dark room. He looked tired. Darius had probably screamed at him earlier about the microphone levels. I lifted a finger to my lips, signaling for silence. I handed Mike a folded $100 bill, a real one this time, and a USB drive. "Take a break, Mike," I whispered. "I will handle the presentation from here." Mike looked at the money, then at the frantic energy in the room outside, and shrugged. He took the cash and slipped out the back door without a word. I was alone with the soundboard. On the stage, Darius stepped into the spotlight. He adjusted his microphone, flashing that winning, predatory smile that had fooled so many people for so long. He looked out at the sea of faces, at the sharks and the whales he hoped to fleece one last time. "Welcome, everyone," Darius boomed, his voice echoing through the massive hall. "Thank you for joining us on this historic night. Tonight we aren't just celebrating the past. We are unveiling the future of Otis Logistics. I am about to share with you a vision that will change the industry forever." He paused for dramatic effect, waiting for the applause. Courtney clapped enthusiastically, urging others to join in. I stood in the darkness of the booth, my hand hovering over the main console. I looked at the laptop screen where his PowerPoint presentation was queued up. It was full of fake graphs and stolen projections. I looked at the USB drive I had just plugged in. It contained only one file. The truth. Darius raised his hands, basking in the attention. "But before I show you the numbers, let me tell you about integrity. My grandfather built this company on trust, and tonight I want to honor that trust." I smiled behind my mask. "You want to honor the trust, Darius," I whispered to myself. "Okay, let's honor the trust." I hit the enter key. Darius pointed the clicker at the giant screen behind him, expecting to see his title slide. Instead, the screen flickered black for a second. The audio system let out a low, ominous hum. Darius frowned, clicking the remote again. "A little technical difficulty, folks," he joked nervously. Live TV, right? But it wasn't a difficulty. It was an override. I pushed the fader up on the soundboard, preparing to unmute the video that was about to play. I watched Darius tap the microphone, confusion starting to cloud his confident features. I took a deep breath. The mask felt tight against my skin, but my hands were steady. I wasn't Nia the sister anymore. I wasn't the victim. I was the judgment. And court was officially in session. The room went silent as the screen behind Darius flickered. The PowerPoint slides filled with inflated numbers and false promises vanished, replaced by a single stark image. It was a high-resolution scan of a legal document, the words "Notice of Immediate Asset Seizure and Removal of Executive Officer" emblazoned across the top in bold red letters. The logo of the Otis Legacy Trust stamped the bottom right corner like a seal of judgment. Darius turned around, his smile freezing in place. He clicked his remote, frantically hitting the next slide button over and over again, but the image remained fixed. "What is this?" he stammered, his voice echoing in the sudden quiet of the ballroom. "Technical difficulties, everyone. Just a moment." Mike cut the feed. "Cut it now." But Mike was gone, and I was the one at the controls. I pushed the microphone fader up to maximum volume. I stepped out from the shadows of the tech booth, the heavy velvet curtains swishing closed behind me. The spotlight that had been focused on Darius shifted, controlled by my command, swinging across the room to land directly on me. I walked down the center aisle. The sound of my heels on the parquet floor was the only noise in the cavernous room. Heads turned. I saw the confusion on the faces of the investors, the shock on Courtney's face as she recognized the midnight blue dress she had insulted just minutes ago. But this time, I wasn't holding a tray of drinks. I was holding a microphone. "Who are you?" Darius shouted, shielding his eyes from the glare of the spotlight. "Security! Get this woman out of here. She is hijacking the event." I didn't stop walking until I reached the foot of the stage. I reached up and untied the silk ribbon of my mask. It fell to the floor, revealing my face to the hundreds of people who had ignored me for decades. "Hello, Darius," I said, my voice calm, amplified to fill every corner of the room. Darius stumbled back as if physically struck. "Nia." "What? What are you doing? You are supposed to be in the coat check." I ignored him, turning to face the crowd. I saw Mr. Sterling standing near the front, nodding solemnly. I saw the bankers, the lawyers, the sharks who had come to feed on the carcass of my family's legacy. "My name is Nia Otis," I announced. "And I am the chairman of the Otis Legacy Trust. The presentation you were about to see was a lie. There is no sustainable tech initiative. There is no 300% growth. There is only a company that has been leveraged to the brink of bankruptcy by a CEO who treats corporate assets like his personal piggy bank." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Darius turned purple. "You are lying," he screamed, rushing to the edge of the stage. "She is crazy. She is just my jealous little sister. She has nothing. Grandpa left her lunch money. Security." I said, "Get her out of here." Two large security guards stepped forward, unsure of what to do. They looked from Darius to me. "I wouldn't do that." A deep voice cut through the tension. Mr. Sterling stepped out from the crowd holding a thick leather folder. He walked up to the guards, flashing a badge that made them step back immediately. "I am Arthur Sterling, representing the Sovereign Private Vaults and the Otis Legacy Trust," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "As of 5 minutes ago, the Board of Trustees has voted unanimously to trigger the removal clause of the CEO." He turned to Darius, handing him a single sheet of paper. "You are fired, Mr. Otis, effective immediately. You are trespassing on company property." Darius slapped the paper away. "Fired. You can't fire me. I own the company. I have the shares. I have the mansion. I am Otis Logistics." "No, Darius," I said, climbing the stairs to stand next to him on the stage. I towered over him in my heels, looking down at the brother who had made me feel small for my entire life. You own the common stock. You own the name. But you don't own the debt. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the envelope. I took out the $100 bill and the $10 bill. I held them up for the camera that was projecting everything onto the giant screen behind us. Do you remember this? I asked. You laughed at it. You said it was enough for a bus ticket. You threw it on the floor and made me pick it up. Darius stared at the money sweat pouring down his face. It is just cash, Nia. It is paper. What are you trying to prove? I turned the bills over. On the screen, the magnification revealed the truth. The intricate scrollwork on the $100 bill wasn't just decoration. It was text. Tiny legal text. This isn't just $110, Darius. This is a Class A super voting share certificate issued in 1928. It carries a par value of $110, but it carries 51% of the voting rights for the entire conglomerate. The room gasped. I saw the investors in the front row pulling out their phones, frantically calling their brokers. Grandpa didn't leave you the empire. I continued, my voice steady and cold. He left you a test. He gave you the keys to the car, but he gave me the pink slip. He wanted to see if you would build something, or if you would just sell it for parts. And you failed, Darius. You failed in 3 days. Courtney rushed up the stairs, grabbing Darius's arm. Do something, she hissed. Tell them she is lying. Tell them it is a fake. It is not a fake, Mr. Sterling said, stepping up to the microphone. The serial numbers have been verified by the Swiss Banking Authority. Miss Otis is the majority shareholder, and she has just exercised her right to foreclose on the personal assets of the former CEO to cover the unauthorized withdrawal of company funds. Foreclose? Courtney shrieked. On what? On everything, I said, looking her dead in the eye. The cars, the accounts, and this house. You signed a second mortgage yesterday, didn't you, Darius? To pay for this party. Well, the trust bought that mortgage this morning. And since you are in default on your primary loans, we are calling it in. I looked out at the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the deception. The gala is over. The bar is closed. And I would ask that you please vacate the premises. The new management has a lot of cleaning up to do. Darius fell to his knees. It wasn't a dramatic gesture for the audience. His legs just gave out. He looked at the bills in my hand, the $110 that had just cost him $1 billion fortune. You can't do this, he whispered. We are family. I looked down at him, remembering the rain, the insults, the way he had erased me from my own home. Yes, we are, I said softly. And that is the only reason I am not pressing criminal charges for embezzlement. Yet. Now get off my stage, Darius. You are blocking the view. The silence that descended upon the ballroom was heavier than the crystal chandeliers hanging above us. Darius remained on his knees, a broken king in a kingdom of paper, staring at the floor as if hoping a trapdoor would open and swallow him whole. But it was Courtney who moved first. Her survival instinct, honed by years of social climbing and shape-shifting to fit whatever mold would grant her the most power, kicked into overdrive. I watched her face transform. The shock melted away, replaced instantly by a mask of frantic, terrifying affection. She smoothed her wine-stained dress, forced a tremble into her lip, and rushed toward me with her arms outstretched, ignoring the fact that she had called me a clumsy idiot less than an hour ago. Nia, baby. She cried out, her voice pitching up into a register that was meant to sound endearing, but sounded like a desperate violin. Oh my God, you really had us going there for a minute. She reached for my hand, her fingers cold and clammy, trying to intertwine them with mine. I looked down at her manicured claws, the same hands that had thrown my suitcase into the rain, and I did not flinch. I simply stepped back, letting her grasp at empty air. Courtney did not stop. She laughed, a brittle, hysterical sound that echoed off the high ceilings. You are such a prankster, Nia, just like Grandpa. She turned to the crowd, waving her hand dismissively at the screen that still displayed the seizure notice. Everyone, isn't she funny? This is just a performance piece. A little drama to spice up the evening before the real party starts. She turned back to me, her eyes pleading, whispering furiously. Play along, Nia. Please, we are sisters. I always defended you. I always told Darius to be nicer. We can share. We can work something out. Just tell them it is a joke. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no pity, just the cold indifference of a balance sheet that had finally been reconciled. You defended me, I asked into the microphone, my voice flat. You told Darius to be nicer. That is an interesting version of history, Courtney. But since we are sharing stories tonight, I think we should hear from the third member of our happy family. I pulled my phone from my clutch. The black screen reflected the stage lights like a mirror. I scanned the crowd until I found Evelyn. My stepmother was standing near the exit, her hand on the door handle, trying to slip away unnoticed, like a rat abandoning a sinking ship. "Where are you going, Evelyn?" I called out. The spotlight swung wildly, catching her in its harsh glare. She froze, clutching her stolen alligator bag to her chest. "Don't leave yet. We are just getting to the toasts." I plugged my phone into the podium's audio jack. A sharp crackle of static made the audience wince, followed by the clear, high-definition sound of a voice recording. It was the conversation from the archives amplified to a deafening volume. Evelyn's voice filled the room, stripped of its usual sugary coating, revealing the rot underneath. $110. Are you stupid, Nia? We need millions. That pocket change wouldn't buy the aspirin for his headache. Courtney gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Darius looked up, his eyes narrowing as he recognized the voice of the woman he had treated like a mother. But I wasn't done. I skipped forward to the part of the recording I had saved for this exact moment. "Darius is a fool," Evelyn's voice sneered on the recording. "He is reckless and arrogant. He is going to run this company into the ground within a year. That is why I need you to sign the rights over to me, Nia. Once I have control, I will cut him loose. I will send him to rehab or whatever, and Courtney, well, that gold digger can go back to the trailer park she came from. We just need to use his illness to get the money first." The recording ended with a click. The silence that followed was violent. Courtney slowly turned to look at Evelyn across the room. The facade of the polished socialite shattered completely. "You witch!" Courtney screamed, her face twisting into a snarl. "Trailer park. I supported you. I introduced you to the boardwives. I let you live in the guest suite." Evelyn, realizing there was no escape, dropped the act. She marched back into the room, her face red with fury. "Oh, shut up, you useless parasite!" she yelled back, pointing a shaking finger at Courtney. "You spent more on shoes last month than this company made in profit. You are the reason we are in this mess. If you hadn't demanded that ridiculous renovation, Darius wouldn't have had to embezzle the operating funds." Darius scrambled to his feet, looking between the two women who were supposed to be his allies. "You knew," he shouted at Evelyn. "You knew I was taking the money. You told me it was okay. You told me it was my inheritance. I didn't tell you to get caught." "You idiot!" Evelyn shrieked, throwing her bag onto the floor. "I tried to save us. I tried to get the little mouse to sign the waiver. But you had to antagonize her. You had to kick her out. You couldn't just play nice for 1 week." I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. I just stood at the podium and watched them tear each other apart. It was a cannibalistic feeding frenzy. They were revealing every crime, every betrayal, every secret they had kept hidden, screaming them into the open air for the police, the press, and the investors to hear. The audience watched in horrified fascination. This was the true face of the Otis dynasty without the mask of money to hide it. Ugly, desperate, and completely devoid of loyalty. "Enough," I said finally. My voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of the gavel, and they fell silent, instantly panting and disheveled. I looked out at the sea of faces in the ballroom. The investors looked sick. The socialites looked scandalous. Mr. Sterling looked proud. "As you can see," I said, addressing the room, "the previous management had a conflict of interest. But that ends tonight. As the majority shareholder and chairman of the trust, I am announcing a complete restructuring of Otis Logistics. Darius took a step toward me, his eyes wild. You can't do this, Nia. You can't run a company. You are an archivist. You preserve old paper. I looked at him. Exactly, Darius. I preserve history, and I know the difference between value and price. Which is why starting tomorrow, this company is no longer a personal piggy bank for the Otis family. I took a breath, letting the next words hang in the air. We are liquidating the executive luxury assets. The jets, the penthouses, and this mansion will be sold. The proceeds will be used to pay back the creditors and to fully fund the pension plans that my brother drained. Furthermore, 50% of all future profits will be directed into a new charitable foundation dedicated to urban development and education in the communities we serve. The crowd murmured this time with respect. A few people started to clap. And as for the family, I continued looking down at the trio of vipers at my feet. The Otis family members who have been complicit in this fraud are hereby stripped of all shares, titles, and stipends. You will receive nothing, not a salary, not a dividend, not a penny. You are walking out of here with exactly what you earned. Zero. Courtney sank to the floor, sobbing into her hands. Evelyn stared blankly at the wall, her schemes finally exhausted. Darius just shook his head, muttering over and over, "No, no, this isn't real." But the reality was about to get much louder. From outside the mansion, the sound of approaching sirens cut through the night air. Blue and red lights began to flash against the tall ballroom windows, a strobe light of justice illuminating the wreckage of the party. Darius looked at the windows, then at me. His face went white. "Nia, what did you do?" "I didn't just send the evidence to the investors, Darius," I said softly, stepping down from the stage to stand eye to level with him. "I sent the ledger to the Economic Crimes Unit 3 days ago. I told you. I am an archivist. I keep records, and I keep my receipts." The double doors of the ballroom burst open with a crash. A team of officers in tactical vests swarmed into the room, their badges glinting under the chandeliers. The lead detective scanned the room and locked eyes with me. I nodded, pointing a single gloved finger at the man standing in the ruins of his own ego. "Darius Otis," the detective shouted, his voice booming. "You are under arrest for corporate embezzlement, securities fraud, and grand larceny. Put your hands behind your back." As the officers moved in, cuffing Darius, then Courtney, and finally a screaming Evelyn, I turned away. I didn't need to watch them get dragged out. I had already seen the end of this movie. I walked over to the side of the stage where a waiter had abandoned a tray of champagne. I didn't drink it. I just picked up the glass, looked at the bubbles rising to the top, and whispered to the empty air. "To liquidity and control, Grandpa. To liquidity and control." The fall of the House of Otis did not happen with a bang, but with the slow, agonizing grind of the legal system. It took 6 months for the courts to chew up my brother and spit him out, and every day of those 6 months was a fresh humiliation for him. Darius stood before the judge, a man who had once played golf with our grandfather, and pleaded for leniency. He claimed ignorance. He claimed he was a victim of bad advice. He threw everyone under the bus, including Evelyn and his own wife. But the paper trail I had provided was bulletproof. The forensic accounting showed every dollar he had siphoned, every fraudulent expense, and every lie. Because it was a white-collar crime, and because he had technically only stolen from a family trust, the judge was lenient on the prison time. Darius was sentenced to 3 years of probation and 2,000 hours of community service. He avoided a cell, but he could not avoid the bankruptcy. The court ordered the complete liquidation of his personal assets to pay restitution to the trust. I watched from the back of the courtroom as he signed the papers that stripped him of his title, his stocks, and his dignity. The moment the gavel banged, Courtney served him with divorce papers right there at the defense table. She didn't even have the decency to wait until they were outside. She slid the envelope across the mahogany table, whispered, "I am not married to a felon," and walked out. Darius sat there alone, his head in his hands, realizing that without the money, he was not a husband, he was not a CEO, he was just a man with a criminal record and a mountain of debt. His life became a cycle of misery that he had never imagined possible. The state seized the penthouse. They took the cars. He was forced to move into a motel on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place where the neon sign flickered all night and the sheets smelled of stale cigarette smoke. Every morning, instead of putting on an Italian suit, he put on a bright orange safety vest. The man who used to scream at waiters if his water wasn't chilled enough was now spending his days on the side of the interstate picking up trash with a pointed stick. I checked the logs sometimes. He was assigned to the sanitation crew cleaning up the very neighborhoods he had planned to gentrify. The irony was so thick you could choke on it. He had wanted to clean up the streets, and now he was doing it literally one discarded soda can at a time. Courtney did not fare much better. She thought that divorcing Darius would save her social standing, but she underestimated how quickly the elite close ranks. She was branded as toxic. The women she used to brunch with blocked her number. The charity galas she used to organize removed her name from their committees. She was forced to move back in with her parents in New Jersey into her childhood bedroom that still had the same wallpaper from high school. Her parents were not welcoming. They had bragged about their daughter marrying an Otis, and now she was back a divorce scandal-ridden failure with no alimony because Darius had nothing to give. The lowest point for Courtney came 2 months after the gala. I heard about it from Madame Leclerc. Courtney had been seen dragging a large suitcase into a high-end consignment shop on Madison Avenue. It wasn't a shopping trip. She was selling her collection. The 5 Hermes bags she had tried to buy on the company card were gone, but she still had the ones from the good years. She stood at the counter haggling with the shop owner, a woman she used to look down on. She begged for a better price, claiming they were vintage, but the owner offered her pennies on the dollar, knowing Courtney was desperate. She took the money. She had to. She needed it to pay for her divorce lawyer and her car insurance. As she walked out of the store, she saw her reflection in the window. No longer the queen of society, just another woman trying to make rent, clutching a handful of cash that used to be lunch money for her. And then there was Evelyn. My stepmother had always feared being alone. She had spent her life clinging to powerful men, using them as life rafts to keep her afloat in a lifestyle she couldn't afford. Now she was drowning. The court had stripped her of the stipend Grandpa had left her, citing her complicity in the fraud. She was evicted from the Martha's Vineyard estate, which was sold to fund a scholarship program for underprivileged youth. She ended up in a small, subsidized apartment in a gray concrete building downtown. Her torture was psychological. Every day she sat in her cramped living room surrounded by the few knick-knacks she had managed to smuggle out and watch television. And every day she saw me. She saw. The media loved the story of the underdog sister who took back the empire. I was on the news opening the new community centers. I was on the covers of business magazines discussing ethical leadership. Evelyn couldn't escape my face. She watched me turning the Otis Legacy Trust into a force for good, earning the respect and admiration she had always craved, but never earned. She became the bitter old woman in apartment 4B, the one who yelled at the neighbors and told wild stories about how she used to own a mansion, stories that nobody believed. She was erased from the narrative of relevance, just a footnote in the story of my success. I let them simmer in their new realities for a while. I didn't contact them. I didn't answer the few begging emails Darius sent from a library computer. I focused on the work. I focused on rebuilding the company, hiring back the employees Darius had fired, and restoring the integrity of the family name. But there was one last thing I needed to do. One final loop to close. It was a Tuesday afternoon, unseasonably warm for November. I told my driver to take me to the confusing intersection of 5th and Main near the public park. I knew Darius's schedule. I knew this was where his crew would be working today. The black town car glided to a stop along the curb. I didn't get out immediately. I watched him through the tinted glass. Darius looked 20 years older. His hair was thinning and unkempt. His skin was rough from exposure to the sun and wind. He was hunched over, stabbing at a pile of wet leaves and fast food wrappers near a park bench. A supervisor younger than him by a decade yelled at him to pick up the pace. Darius didn't argue. He didn't scream, "Do you know who I am?" He just nodded and kept working, defeated, broken. He was no longer the tiger who had prowled the boardroom. He was just a man in an orange vest trying to get through the day. I opened the car door. The sound of the heavy latch clicking echoed in the quiet street. Darius looked up. He froze when he saw the car. He froze when he saw the driver step out to hold the door. And then he saw me. I was wearing a simple trench coat and flat shoes, not the armor I had worn to the gala. I didn't need the armor anymore. I walked over to the edge of the sidewalk. I didn't step onto the grass where he was working. I stayed on the pavement, maintaining the boundary between his world and mine. Darius stared at me. He gripped his trash picker like a lifeline. His eyes darted to his supervisor, then back to me. He looked ashamed. He looked hungry. "Nia," he croaked. His voice was rough, unused to speaking without shouting. I didn't say hello. I didn't ask him how he was. I just reached into my pocket. I pulled out a crisp new $10 bill. It wasn't the special one from Grandpa. It was just $10. I stepped forward and placed it on the concrete bench next to where he was working. I put a small rock on top of it so the wind wouldn't blow it away. Darius looked at the money. He looked at me, confusion clouding his eyes. "For lunch," I said softly. My voice was not angry. It was just final. "Don't spend it all in one place." Darius looked at the bill. $10. The exact amount he had mocked. The amount he said wasn't enough for anything. Now to him, it was a fortune. It was a meal. It was survival. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to say thank you, perhaps to beg for more, but I didn't wait. I turned around and walked back to the car. I didn't look back. As the car pulled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Darius was standing over the bench, clutching the $10 in his dirty gloved hand, staring after me. He finally understood the value of money. He finally understood that the power wasn't in the amount, it was in the hand that held it. And for the first time in his life, he was the one looking for a handout, and I was the bank. The transaction was complete. The debt was settled, and I was free. The silence inside the Otis mansion had changed. For 30 years, it had been a silence of exclusion, of secrets whispered behind closed mahogany doors, and the muffled sounds of servants making themselves invisible. But as I walked through the grand hallway on a crisp Tuesday morning, the silence felt different. It was the silence of a blank canvas. The auctioneers had come and gone, taking with them the heavy velvet drapes, the gaudy gold-framed portraits of ancestors who frowned at everyone, and the overpriced furniture that was more uncomfortable than it looked. The house was stripped bare down to its good bones, and for the first time since I was a child, I could actually breathe in here. I stood in the center of the ballroom, the exact spot where I had exposed my family's fraud to the world. The parquet floor still bore the faint scuff marks from where the stage had been, but the darkness of that night was gone. Sunlight poured in through the uncurtained windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. My real estate agent, a shark named Marcus, who had been salivating over the commission, had urged me to sell it as a private residence. He told me a hedge fund manager from Connecticut was offering $20 million cash. It would have been the smart financial move, the move Darius would have made in a heartbeat. But I wasn't Darius. I realized that if I sold this house to another rich family, the cycle would just continue. Another gate would be locked. Another group of people would be kept out. I didn't want to erase the history of this house, I wanted to rewrite it. I decided not to live here. I couldn't sleep in a place where I had been treated like a ghost. Instead, I kept the deed and called in a team of architects with a very specific vision. I told them to tear down the iron gates that separated the estate from the rest of the neighborhood. I told them to turn the guest cottage, the place of my exile, into a residency program for young historians and archivists. And the main house, this cavernous monument to ego, was going to become the Otis Community Arts Center. It took 6 months of renovation, but last week we finally opened the doors. I stood on the balcony and watched as a school bus pulled up the long driveway. Kids from the inner city schools, the same schools that Darius had tried to cut funding for, poured out onto the lawn. They ran through the gardens laughing and shouting, touching the statues that used to be off limits. I walked down to the main gallery where my grandfather's library used to be. It was now filled with vibrant paintings by local artists, stories of struggle and triumph hanging on the walls where Evelyn used to display her vanity plates. Seeing those children claim this space, seeing them run through the halls without fear, was the greatest return on investment I could have ever asked for. I didn't keep the bulk of the money either. I kept enough to live comfortably in a nice townhouse in the city close to the library, and I reinvested a portion into the logistics company to ensure the pensions were safe. But the rest, the hundreds of millions that Darius had killed for, I put to work. I established the 1928 scholarship fund named after the year on that fateful bill. It was a full-ride scholarship for students pursuing degrees in library science history and archival preservation. I wanted to find the other Nias out there, the quiet ones, the ones who sat in the back of the room observing, the ones who valued the truth over the spotlight. I wanted to give them the one thing I never had growing up, a chance. I personally reviewed the first round of applications. Reading their essays, I cried for the first time since the funeral. These young people had such passion, such reverence for the past, and yet they were struggling to pay for textbooks. I signed the approval letters myself, writing my name Nia Otis, not as a signature of ownership, but as a promise of support. I was no longer hoarding the legacy, I was sharing it. And in sharing it, I found that the hole in my chest, the one left by my parents' neglect and my siblings' cruelty, finally began to close. The final step of my journey took me to the one place I had avoided since the will reading: the cemetery. It was a bright afternoon, the sky a piercing blue that reminded me of the ink on the $10 bill. I parked my car, a sensible hybrid that Darius would have mocked, and walked up the hill to the family plot. The grass was green and manicured, a stark contrast to the chaos of the last year. I stopped in front of the large gray obelisk that marked the Otis graves. Darius's name wasn't there, of course, and neither was Evelyn's. They were still alive, living their small, bitter lives elsewhere. I looked at the simple headstone at the center: Otis James Otis, beloved grandfather, visionary. I knelt down on the damp earth, not caring about the grass stains on my pants. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small laminated replica of the two bills, the 100 and the 10, the paper key that had unlocked the truth. I placed them gently against the cold stone. "You knew, Grandpa," I whispered into the wind. "You knew exactly what would happen. You knew that money acts like a magnifying glass. It doesn't change people, it just shows you who they really are. It made Darius a monster because he was already greedy. It made Courtney desperate because she was already empty. And it made me powerful because I was already strong. I just didn't know it yet." I traced the letters of his name with my finger. "You didn't leave me a fortune to make me rich. You left me a fortune to set me free. And you taught me the hardest lesson of all, that the real legacy isn't the logistics company. It isn't the buildings or the bank accounts. It is the integrity to do the right thing when no one is watching. It is the courage to stand alone when the world is against you." I thought about the black sheep label that had been pinned to me for so long. They called me the black sheep because I didn't fit in, because I didn't play their games. But standing there in the quiet of the graveyard, I realized that the black sheep is often the only one telling the truth. The black sheep is the one who breaks the cycle. I wasn't the outcast anymore. I was the anchor. I stood up, brushing the dirt from my hands. I felt light. The heavy burden of proving myself, of seeking their validation, had evaporated. I didn't need Darius to respect me. I didn't need Courtney to like me. I didn't even need the world to know my name. I just needed to know that when I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who had kept her soul intact. I turned away from the grave, leaving the replica bills as a final offering. The wind picked up, blowing through the trees, creating a sound that sounded like a whisper of approval. I walked back down the path, my stride long and confident. I passed the towering mausoleums of other wealthy families, realizing how small and insignificant all that posturing really was. In the end, we all end up in the same ground. The only thing that matters is what we leave behind in the hearts of others. I reached my car and opened the door. I paused for a moment, looking back at the city skyline in the distance. Somewhere out there, Darius was sweeping a street. Somewhere Evelyn was complaining to a neighbor. And somewhere in a library, a student was opening a scholarship letter that would change their life. The scales were balanced. The ledger was closed. I got into the driver's seat and started the engine. I adjusted the rearview mirror, but I didn't look back at the cemetery. I looked forward at the open road. I put the car in drive and pulled away, leaving the title of the black sheep in the dust. I was Nia Otis. I was an archivist. I was a leader. And for the first time in my life, I was completely and utterly free. Grandpa Otis taught me that we must never confuse price with value. While my family chased the appearance of wealth, they lost the substance of character. Being the black sheep was not a curse. It was a vantage point that allowed me to see the truth while others were blinded by greed. True legacy is not defined by mansions or titles, but by integrity, resilience, and the quiet courage to stand alone. When the money is gone, you are left with only who you truly are. Make sure that person is someone you can be proud of. Have you ever been underestimated by those closest to you? I would love to hear your story of resilience in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the shadows.